even in the most dire of circumstances, we do have a great deal of control over what A, we choose to concentrate, focus on, and B, how we choose to lead our lives. So even in an unkind world, we can choose to be kind. In an unhappy world, we can still do things, actively engaging things that contribute to our own and others' happiness. And interestingly, one of the best things that we can do for our personal happiness is to be kind, generous to others.
Family, someone I have great respect for and so much joy with, is Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. Dr. Tal is a man who has turned happiness into both a science and an art. And I'm talking a lot about happiness and the responsibility we have to bring joy into our lives and into the lives of others. Well, Dr. Tal taught the most popular course in Harvard's history on positive psychology. He packed lecture halls with students hungry to understand the foundations of a meaningful life. As co-founder of the Happiness Studies Academy and author of bestsellers like Happier and The Joy of Leadership, Dr. Tal has dedicated his life to a question we're all seeking an answer to. How do we create genuine happiness in our lives and our workplaces? What stands out most about Dr. Tal is how he combines rigorous research with practical wisdom that anybody can apply. He doesn't just teach happiness, he lives it. And today, he's here to share that wisdom with our family so that we can live happiness too. Dr. Tal. Dr. Tal, thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this for some time, right?
Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
And I think we can jump right into it because, you're a happy person and you're an expert on happiness. And so many people aren't happy right now, or at least they're expressing that they're not. And one of the most important lessons ever taught to me was to know my ministry in the moment. Ministry being, what do you really put here spiritually, emotionally to fulfill? So let's begin this conversation with discovering your ministry, that purpose that drives everything you do. And wow, you do a lot. What sparked that first moment when happiness became your calling, doctor? And how has that journey evolved from those early lectures to your work today?
So what launched me on this purpose is my own unhappiness. So initially it was very much personal, but Carl Rogers, the famed 20th century American psychologist, said, what is most personal is most general. And I took this personal journey, and over time it became much more than that for me. And today my mission statement is very simple: to spread happiness. And when I do that, or when I feel that I do that, that of course contributes to my happiness and to my sense of meaning and purpose.
Is there a formula for spreading happiness? I know you do it through your classroom work, and many people read your content and can learn. Do you have a formula you ascribe to, since it is a life's work?
So I do a lot of teaching and I do a lot of writing. And in both my teaching and writing, there are three important elements as far as I'm concerned. The first one is that it has to be evidence-based, scientific. So this is how, my work and the work in academic institutions in general distinguishes itself from, say, the self-help or the New Age movement. So first of all, it has to be academic. Second, it has to be applied, because very often work in academia is not applied. It's interesting research, maybe important research. However, the question when it comes to happiness, can it be applied directly to people's lives, whether it's individuals, whether it's to couples, families, or organizations? And the third criterion that I use when I choose what to teach is, do I apply it myself? So I would, it doesn't mean that one has to be happy in order to teach happiness, or that one has to be, a great basketball player to be a basketball coach. It's reminds me, my friend says that you don't need to be a triangle to teach trigonometry, and it's true. However, when it comes to happiness, what you do need to do is be on the path, meaning to apply. So I can teach meditation only if I practice meditation. I don't have to be a superstar meditator. I can teach the importance of exercise. At the same time, I need to exercise myself. Again, I don't need to run a marathon, but I need to be exercising. So it's these three elements. It has to be evidence-based, has to be applied, and I have to walk my talk.
Well, I believe that you're an expert at all of that, and we're really grateful. I should say happy that you are. Doctor, are there elements different to creating or sustaining individual happiness and group happiness? And I'm asking that because, as you and I briefly alluded to, many people are saying they're not happy today. But can't you have happiness without everything being happy? Those are two different questions.
Yes, so there is a very strong connection between the person and the environment, of course. I remember, I wasn't alive then, but my teacher, Philip Stone, told me about a study that came out in 1967, just before, that really rocked the world of psychology. And the research was by Walter Mischel. And what he showed was that most of our behavior is not determined by our personal individual character, but rather by our environment, by the situation. And in many ways, this is a finding that launched the whole field of social psychology, showing how much the social environment matters. Well, it doesn't just affect our behavior, whether we're moral or immoral, whether we're generous or not, it also affects our happiness. So work by Christakis, Fowler, and many others shows that when we're around people who are happy, we generally tend to be happy. Just like when we're around smokers, we're more likely to smoke. Or when we're around people who take good care of their physical health, we're more likely to go to the gym and eat healthfully. So the environment matters a great deal. Now, in a world where, such as we are in today, where there are wars and when there is a great deal of discontent, when there is political schism and a great deal of discontent in general, of course it affects people's well-being. So what's the solution to that? Well, one way to deal with it is to say, well, okay, so I'm a victim of my environment, and there is some truth to that. Another way to look at it is to say, well, I'm also part of the environment, and I can change the environment by being not a passive victim, but rather an active agent. One of my mentors is a woman by the name of Marva Collins. Marva Collins was a school teacher in inner city Chicago.
Yes.
And I'm looking up because I'm looking at her picture right now. It's on my wall.
Very
And
familiar.
what she did was she literally transformed the lives of hundreds and thousands of students who were raised in dire poverty, whose teachers would normally say to them, well, you can't really succeed, whether explicitly, usually implicitly. And she came to these environments, inner city, very poor, exposed to a great deal of crime and unhappiness. And she said to those students, it's up to you. And she changed their lives. And not only did she change their lives, she changed their families' lives. So they became active agents in their families, and they changed their neighborhoods because they became active agents. And the reason why I have a picture of her just here is to remind me that even in the most dire of circumstances, we do have a great deal of control over what A, we choose to concentrate, focus on, and B, how we choose to lead our lives. So even in an unkind world, we can choose to be kind. In an unhappy world, we can still do things, actively engaging things that contribute to our own and others' happiness. And interestingly, one of the best things that we can do for our personal happiness is to be kind, generous to others.
My mother would love to be in this conversation with you. Then again, she may just listen and wink at me like, yes, yes, yes. In my office, in one of the most expensive things I have in there, a tiny little frame, I have written, we get our results from where we place our attention. And you are
Mm,
so right. How we, want to result our lives is about what we're focusing and looking on. And Marva Collins was such a beautiful expression of that and an experiment of that. I think a couple of schools back in my hometown area in North Carolina actually started giving out Marva Collins awards to teachers. Certainly, had I known her story, I would have thought, wow, each of the teachers I had in my little segregated elementary school would have deserved the Marva Collins Award. My education was in a segregated school, with the
mm,
exception of my 11th grade year, up until I matriculated from 12th grade. And so I saw many people who rose, through the dirt to actually plant good seed. Going back to our roots often reveals so much about our journey choices and our present, as I've shared with you mine. Certainly impacted me. What was young Tall like before Dr. Tall? And what kind of experiences during your childhood or adolescence do you think planted the seed for your later insights about happiness and well being? Because you did just mention to me it was your unhappiness that led you, or at least fueled, your focus on happiness.
mm. Yes, so the activity that essentially dominated my childhood was squash. So I picked up squash at the age of 11. And I remember distinctly thinking when I was, between the age of 14 and 16, what am I going to do with my life when I no longer have squash? Because I really couldn't imagine doing anything else. So my plan was to play professionally and then after a professional career to become a squash coach. Um, the reason why the experience defined me in such a way was because while I was very committed and dedicated to squash, I was also alongside constantly stressed out. I was constantly anxious. There seemed to be
Did
a
you like
knot.
squash? You played it a lot, but did you like it?
So I did like squash. I loved squash, and at the same time, I felt a lot of stress and anxiety. Why? Because I was, and to some extent still is, a perfectionist. And what
Mm,
does that mean? People uh, often, when they're asked in job interviews, so what's your weakness? And they would, proudly wink, wink, say, well, I'm a perfectionist. And of
mm,
course, the message here, well, you can trust me. I'm responsible. I work hard. I'm caring. And yes, that is part of perfectionism. And of course, these are the parts that I like and I'm very proud of. But there is also a dark side to perfectionism, what psychologists call maladaptive as opposed to adaptive perfectionism. And what does that entail? Well, it means a very deep seated and extreme fear of failure. It
mm,
also means being very defensive, because if anyone says something about me which is not perfect, I have to immediately, get my shield up. And the best form of defense, certainly for a perfectionist, is attack.
mm,
So it hurts relationships. It leads to a great deal of unhappiness because constant stress. When I was growing up playing squash, I was always stressed. Why? Because no practice was perfect and no match was flawless. And yes, even if I did win a match or a tournament, I would, of course, be happy, sometimes delighted, but not for long because the next opportunity for imperfection would be just around the corner, whether it's the next tournament, the next match, or the next practice. So it was constant anxiety. And that's how I basically lived for years. And I would always tell myself, okay, you're stressed now, but if you win the national championships, then you'd be happy. Finally. And eventually I did win the national championships, and I was happy for a few hours. And then the stress returned. Why? Because I was not the world champion. And to be perfect, you need to be a world champion. And then I went, I left for England and joined the professional circuit and played with the world champion and improved and got better. And the stress continued. And then I got injured. Part of the reason was because I overdid it. It was all or nothing. Either I train like the world champion or I don't train at all. It doesn't matter whether my body was ready for it or not. My mind was, or thought it was. And so I didn't just pay an emotional price, I also paid a physical price for this perfectionism. And then after I got injured, my goal was substituted. The exact same approach continued, but the goal, instead of wanting to become the world squash champion, I wanted to get into the top university. So I worked hard for that, was very stressed, and then I got in and I thought, okay, now I'm ready to be happy. And it took me a couple of months to return as a freshman at Harvard, a few months to return to exactly where I was before, because I had to deliver, or hand in the perfect paper, get the, perfect exam. And even if I did get my A, well, there'd be another exam the following day or 2 months later. So it was ongoing dissatisfaction. And this is the inevitable lot of the perfectionist. JBH, you said earlier, what we concentrate on, what we focus on, that becomes our reality. That becomes our world. If I focus on constantly what I don't have, well, then I will live a life of lack, of absence. Whereas if I focus on what I can appreciate, my life will be very different. Even if objectively it's the same, my subjective experience of life will be very different if I'm a perfectionist or what I would call an optimalist.
Mm. This is fascinating, and you're taking me back to so many of the things that I heard and was taught in my home as a child. You may be aware that I'm one of 11 children, one mom, one dad, deep South, very poor people. Didn't know I was poor until I went to university, actually. It wasn't Harvard, but it was North Carolina A&T State University. I did pride. And Doctor, you know, a couple of things come to mind because I have in my books mommyisms, things my mom would say all the time or my dad would say all the time. And she used to tell us, uh, happiness can't depend on if. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to think about that as you were saying,
Exactly.
about your work, because it was work for you in squash. It wasn't exercise or fun, it was work. Well, maybe there was exercise and fun, but it was consuming work amongst the top in the world. Then if you get into the top
Exactly.
university, all of that. And you bring me back to her saying happiness doesn't depend on if. And another thing that my mom and my dad were resolute on was happiness is a choice. You know, Being poor, there were things we wanted we couldn't get. I'm sure if we'd had the money, we still couldn't have gotten them based on how our parents' discipline played out. But, I wanted this Barbie doll the year she came out, and I sulked and sulked as a child. And my mom, what's wrong, what's wrong? And we had a happy household. It was almost like it was the law. You got to be happy, which can have its own issues and pressures, right? But she was so concerned about me, and she sat down with me. She put her arms around me, and she explained the consequences to the family financially for me to get what I wanted. And we compromised, and I did get a Barbie doll and a plain swimsuit, and then she gave me scraps of fabric and told me, you'll enjoy making your own fashion, which I ended up actually enjoying.
Mm,
But she said, don't wait to see if Barbie's in that, in, Santa leaves Barbie. Happiness is a decision. You can be happy right now. And as a child, I didn't understand that. The work you do challenges common belief that being happy means feeling good all the time. And many of us have learned from science that pressure is required to create diamonds, right? The kind of diamonds, I think, of ideology that my mom and dad attempted to create in us by
mm.
actually letting us go through the process. Could you share what science actually does tell us, though, about the relationship between happiness and difficult emotions? As we said earlier, you and I, there are a lot of people today who are not happy.
Yeah. Um, so, JBH, with your permission, before I talk about this connection, I want to say something about your mom because um, her idea, don't rely or don't wait for the if,
Hmm.
is is very important because so many of us do. And your mom understood it, knew it intuitively, or maybe from her mom. Um, but there's a lot of research on this, what I've come to call the arrival fallacy. What is the
Ah,
arrival fallacy? It's basically your mom's if, because what it says is that we believe falsely, it's a fallacy, we believe falsely that if we get to winning this championship or into this university or make so much money or get this Barbie doll or get this boyfriend, girlfriend, fill in the blank, whatever it is, then we'll be happy. And that turns out not to be so. If it were so, then the wealthy people in the world or the successful people in the world would also be the happiest people in the world, and they're not. Who are the happiest people in the world? And again, I turn to your mom here. They're the ones who make certain choices in their life. And I go back to what you said at the beginning, the choice to focus on what truly matters. And whether that's family or appreciation or laughter and humor and kindness, these are the things that matter more.
you
And
make me think. You make me think of something. Forgive me, doctor. Am I okay to interject something?
please, please.
You make me think of something, and I shared this recently at a client location for a team of people, professionals who were VPs and above. My there are eight of us living siblings now of the 11. And every morning we check in with each other on
Hmm.
a sibling chat. And on Sundays we do the Zoom dinner together, right? We're in different geographies, different time zones. And so, we get together. And repeatedly it comes up ever since we started doing the Sunday Zooms during COVID. It comes up, doctor, from one of us. Something will make us relate to it. How mom used to sing every day. And I don't know if you know this little song. It's this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it
Yes,
shine.
yes.
And then she could work that song for hours. Even if it's cold, I'm going to let it shine everywhere I go, every circumstance. And we used to laugh really because we were like, mom, that's not really the song. If I still got to wash, I'm going to let it shine. Because washing clothes for my mom meant a washboard in a round tub. And in the wintertime, washing outside with wood and coal fire underneath could get pretty cold until later, much later in life. She got a washing machine and she'd just be singing. People would walk around our house at a certain time of day when they knew Miss Elretha was doing her chores outside so they could hear her sing.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
sure she had a lovely voice, okay, but I think back on it, as a child, I thought they were walking to hear her sing or laugh or whatever, When I think back on it, maybe she was lifting them. I don't know. But we talk about that as siblings, how mom used to sing, about letting her little light so shine.
Hmm.
And so when you're talking about this happy thing, I've wondered often, and I asked my mom, uh, Mom, when you were singing, why were you singing? And she said, I had the choice. I could sing or not sing, you know. Um, and I just I just think there's something to that, that she was making a choice, was sometimes to bring happiness into a chore. Sometimes I think she was just forcing it, like,
Hmm.
I don't know. Anyway, you do with that what you will, but you made me think of it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And the impact of a parent's message or a teacher's message, and by the way, this was Marva Collins' way of teaching. The impact of it is enormous when it's repeated. So the fact that
Ah,
your mom sang it again and again, the fact that Marva
every
Collins
day.
would tell her students, I believe in you, you have a choice, again and again, that is what makes a difference. One of the errors of modern education is the belief that once you've said something once, or covered it once for the exam, then you're all set, you can move on to the next thing. Whereas in religion, it's very different. In religion, you read the same text, whether it's year after year, or sometimes week after week, or day after day, the same prayer. You are constantly reminded, repeatedly reminded of certain values, just as your mom, through her singing, reminded you to let your light shine, just as Marva Collins reminds her students that they're capable. So the repetition is critical here.
And is that part of the science of happiness in an environment of emotional circumstances?
Right. So absolutely, it's this is the science of change, and again, this is no rocket science. This
Okay.
is it's almost trivial and obvious and intuitively, great parents and teachers know this. That change comes through a process. The first part of that process, I call the process the 3 R's of change. The first part is reminders. Remind yourself, or your 11 children, or your 30 kids in class,
Hmm.
to shine, or to breathe, or to smile, or to be kind.
Hmm.
The first R. The second R, don't just do it once or twice, do it day in and day out. You must have repetition. So reminders, repetition. Now the third R, and this is where the science comes in today, rituals.
Uh-huh.
After you remind, after you do it again and again, then rituals are formed. What are rituals? They're quite literally deeply embedded neural pathways. So you and me have neural pathways in our brain associated with brushing our teeth. And that's why it feels second nature, easy, automatic. Um, if you listen to a piece of music over and over again, you have that piece of music deeply embedded. And if you play an instrument, you have the finger movement deeply embedded as neural pathways. If you play tennis, Serena Williams, you wake her up in the middle of the night and you throw a ball at her, she'll hit a forehand. She doesn't need to think about it or analyze it. It's automatic, second nature, because King Richard reminded her when she was a child over and over again, repetition, and then it became a ritual.
Hmm.
So the 3 R's of change are critical for any change process. And again,
Hmm.
religion understands it better than academia these days. They
Hmm.
used to be two sides of the same coin. Today, they are distinct.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Now, JBH, I want to get back to your question about happiness and difficult emotions, because the relationship here is so important and so misunderstood. So, for most people, whether explicitly or implicitly, they believe that to be happy means to be happy all the time. So, for example, they can't imagine that that I, as a professor of happiness, sometimes feel miserable and
Hmm.
upset or
Hmm.
anxious. Even after 30 years of studying and teaching and writing about it and practicing it. Because, in fact, there are only two kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions. And whether it's anxiety or sadness or anger or frustration or envy or discontent, two kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions, the whole range of painful emotions. The first kind of people who don't experience these emotions are the psychopaths. So there's something wrong with them, and therefore they don't experience painful emotions. The second kind of people who do not experience these painful emotions are dead.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone who's alive, all of us, whether we are...
We can't be too sure about them, can we?
But we all experience it, and it's part of being human, part of being alive. Therefore, one of the things that I emphasize when I talk about happiness is giving ourselves the permission to be human, the permission to be human, the permission to experience the full range of human emotions, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, whether it's joy.
Or perfectionism.
Exactly, or perfectionism. Now, here is the thing. Accepting our emotions is a first step. It's not a final step. So, for instance, I can accept the fact that I experience some envy towards a friend. But that's not the end of it. All it means is that I'm human and I experience these emotions. And now, going back to your mom, after I accept that emotion, I have a choice. Am I generous and kind to my friend, or do I hurt them? Just like your mom said, I have a choice. I may not be feeling great today, but I still have a choice whether to sing or not. I may be feeling envy, but I still have a choice whether to act generously and benevolently or harshly towards my friend.
So these feelings can come at us, and we teach, train, and condition ourselves on how we receive them and if we receive them.
And how we behave and how
Yes.
we act after. So the
Yes.
first choice that we have, how do I receive it? There's a beautiful poem by Rumi, the Sufi poet, called The Guest House. And in The Guest House, Rumi talks about how we need to invite all emotions in, no matter what they are, as if they're visitors, envoys from the beyond. Now, I don't know if they come from the beyond or not, that's above my pay grade. But what I do know is that we need to invite them, let them in, rather than fight them. Because when we fight them, they only overstay their welcome. They only grow stronger. In the
Mm.
words of Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, what you resist persists.
Mhm.
So if I say to myself, Tal, don't be sad, you're the happiness professor, immediately my sadness intensifies, grows stronger. Whereas if I just observe it with what Mark Williamson from Oxford calls friendly curiosity. I love that phrase. Friendly curiosity. Oh, how interesting. I'm feeling sad or upset or angry or
I love
anxious.
that.
So what? Moving on.
Giving me a gem there. I love that. Thank you. Friendly curiosity. I will integrate that into my thought process. Um, when I first came, when I arrived in Los Angeles, I was on a vacation and I was visiting my sister and her husband. They were in the music industry. And I mentioned I'm one of 11 siblings, and I happen to be the dark skinned, nappy headed one. And during that time, complexion, hair, texture, all those things played into what was considered beautiful or not. And I was not. My sister looked like a gorgeous white supermodel. Um, and so I came into Los Angeles with this joy around a vacation. Once that vacation extended into a stay, I lost some of the happiness I had about being there, because initially I was just going to be there with my sister, enjoy myself. Once I was going to work there, I actually was going to integrate into the culture of Los Angeles. And it was a beauty culture. And even now, people focus on beauty in Los Angeles based on the entertainment industry. And that's where the livelihood was. And I don't know that I've ever been depressed in my life. But I certainly allowed how I looked to impact how I presented myself when I would go out. Super nervous, everything has to be perfect,
Mm.
listen, leave the Southern drawl home as much as possible, which if you think I've got it now, you should have heard me then. In any event, leaving myself off the table, out of the room, is what I was trying to do. And my sister sat me by her pool one evening. Imagine that. Me, this little nappy headed girl from Tarboro, North Carolina, sitting at a pool that belonged to my sister in Los Angeles. That further complicated the uh,
Mm.
agreement I had made with myself about who I was. And so my sister said something to me that stuck with me, Doctor, and I put it in one of my books. She said, the space between here is the most expensive real estate you'll ever own. Stop letting people and ideas live there rent free. And I
Mm.
asked her, and she said, if it's not paying you forward, you have a choice to let it in. And I could hear her clearly telling me that as you were just talking. So thank you for bringing my sister's lessons back alive
Mm.
as well. And I know you speak about embracing failure as part of growth. Um, I want to go into that a little bit
Yeah.
in our conversation and ask you to elaborate on how this perspective connects to happiness and well being. I think there was some failure in and I don't know that I've connected that well yet.
Mm. So perfectionism has a few elements. So one element is the inability to appreciate what we have because we're always thinking about what we don't have. What stands between us and the perfect. The second element is the one I mentioned. Perfectionists don't give themselves the permission to be human. And the third element revolves around failure. This, I mentioned earlier, this almost obsessive fear of failure because no one likes to fail. It hurts. But for a perfectionist, it's much more than that. It's an assault on who they are, on their identity as worthy human beings. Now, it turns out, no big surprise, that failure is incredibly important. And accepting failure is also incredibly important. So, if you look at the most successful people in the world, and here I'm thinking of research by Dean Simonton from UC Davis and Adam Grant from Wharton, both of them talk about how the most successful people, and whether you're talking artists, scientists, business people, are also the ones who have failed the most time. Because the more you try,
Athletes, right? It's really true in the field of
absolutely.
your initial field, right?
Absolutely, and and Michael Jordan talked about it openly. Said people have no idea how many times, or they don't think about rather how many times I have failed, how many game-winning shots I have missed. So to
Or how many
become,
people told him he wouldn't make it
or
even
exactly
before he
why,
got in the game?
because he failed, not
Uh-huh.
understanding that failure is an inevitable part of success. One of the mantras that I repeat to myself, to my children, students, and clients is learn to fail or fail to learn.
Ha! I love it.
So, because there is no other way. And this has a great deal to do with our success. Now, with our happiness too. Because if I can't accept failure, or rather, let me put it positively, if I can learn to look at failure as a learning opportunity, that is going to contribute a great deal, not just to my success, also to my happiness.
I think when we're talking about happiness, um, years ago, the Dalai Lama told me that happy is what people are looking for in life, and I equate happiness with success. Um, it can look very different from person to person. Sort of one person's pain may be another person's pleasure thing. I'm wondering if there are universal truths about happiness that transcend cultural differences. Um, I know in my industry, success is transferable, right? And when I first got into my industry, doctor, um, I was in a people business supported by technology. Today, I'm in a technology business supported by people to support people. And so the dynamics have shifted a little bit with, I'll put progression in quote, depending on where you are on that. Having taught and studied happiness across various cultures worldwide, what differences have you noticed in how societies approach happiness? And is there a universal truth, as I asked earlier, about happiness
Hmm.
that transcend cultural differences?
Yeah, that's
Fair question.
yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question that's relevant, of course, to research, but even more importantly, to practice. How is that? Um, so there was a wonderful meeting of minds and hearts about 20 some years ago in the north of India. And the people who came there, or among the people who came there, were the leading Western scientists and the Dalai Lama himself, as well as many of his leading meditators and teachers. And they talked about the topic of the conference was around destructive emotions. So how can we deal with painful emotions? And the it was a 5-day event. And again, there were scholars, leading scholars from the top universities around the world. And after a few days, this was, I think, on the third, or I think it was the third of 5 days, the Dalai Lama, puts his hand up, given the mic, and he says the following. He says, "Look, the past couple of days have been really good and important, and I learned so much. And thank you very much for it." And he was the Dalai Lama, very gracious. However, he said, "I'm a bit concerned because we spent so much of the time talking about cultural differences." And this was mostly people from top Western universities, including Berkeley and MIT, UC Berkeley, MIT, Harvard. They talked primarily, and top European universities talked primarily about cultural differences. And he says it's important to talk about cultural differences because they're real. However, I don't want to miss the main point, which is that we're much more similar than we're different.
Mm, mm,
Because a human being is a human being is a human being, whether born and raised in Namibia or Brazil or Japan or New Zealand. So we need to understand that there are universals and that the universals are a significant element of our overall happiness. When we think about happiness, we want to think about it on 3 levels. The first level is the universal, because when you talk about, you started off asking me about it, meaning and purpose. Doesn't matter where I was born or raised, meaning and purpose matters. Again, whether you're in Southern Africa or East Asia or North America, we need a sense of meaning and purpose in life. That's universal. What is also universal is that we all need to be physically active. Whether you are a hunter by profession or a coder by profession, we need physical exercise for health and happiness. These are universals. But that's not the only thing that matters for happiness. What also matters is the cultural. So, what constitutes meaning and purpose in an individualistic society like ours is different than in a collectivistic culture, in a culture of Ubuntu, where I am because you are, or in a culture where it's all about the tribe or the group, such as in Asia.
mm,
So,
mm.
what constitutes meaning and purpose is different in these different cultures. Culture matters, of course. And then there is a third element to happiness, and that's the individual. Because two people raised even in the same neighborhood in Sao Paulo, they different things will make them happy. Different things will bring them a sense of meaning and purpose. You know, my brother is in marketing and he loves it and he's great at it. Will that bring me happiness? No. Will my work bring him happiness? No, even though we were from the same production line. Think
Mm-hmm.
about your siblings. Exactly. Different. So the individual matters as well. So when we think about happiness, we need to think about the universal, we need to think about the cultural, and we need to think about the personal. Now, when it comes to the universal and the cultural, we have research for that, and great research. When it comes to the personal, it's not about research, it's about me search. And
Mm-hmm.
me search is about exploration, looking inside. It's about journaling. It's about conversation. It's about identifying what it is. For example, when I look for a sense of meaning and purpose, what really matters to me? Or or where in my life did I touch what I felt like the divine? These
Oh
are
my
important
goodness.
questions for me
Yes.
search.
Oh my goodness. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Two things. Oh, I pray I keep them both. I wanted to share with you and get your impression on them or your teaching from them if there's a lesson. One, recently I was in a room with Tyler Perry being honored, and he shared, and Tyler is a force to be reckoned with, whether you like his art or not. He i i, I measure him phenomenal because of the journey. You could look at his money and say other people have earned more money. You could look at his product and say other people put out more product. The journey from where he started to where he is, and the many people who have been along that journey or elevated by that journey, is impressive to me. And he cried on stage, and he did it publicly, so I feel good sharing it. I won't share anything I've ever, and so he said he'd just gotten back from Arizona and he'd done some me work. You were talking about working on
Mhm.
the me research. He'd done some me work, and he struggled because by many measures he is successful. Now, my definition of successful was gifted me by Earl Nightingale. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So, I don't have a number on it unless you're, measuring growth. Um, and Tyler said he couldn't receive the accolades, the honors he was getting with any joy. And he had to go to do the work to figure out that anything in his life that hadn't been complete or in the way he wanted it, he could be forgiven for and forgiving himself. You talked about human, right? Allowing yourself to be human. And he said he never felt he deserved it. Now, I think some people call it imposter syndrome or whatever. These terms I stay away from because I'm not educated to them. I am educated to people's emotions, though. That's how I've earned my living. And he was his best sincere self, I think, in that room of highly accomplished people. And I watched the room because I was in the front row center. I could look around and see the room as he spoke. And I saw people not simply appreciating him, doctor, for sharing transparently his recent journey, like hours out of Arizona doing this work with himself, but their journeys and their feelings were exposed in that moment. And so I want to table that to say this. Years ago, I'm talking 40 plus years ago, when I landed in Los Angeles on that vacation I mentioned, I progressed to start my own company. And short of a year of having started my company, I was honored by the Black motion picture folks. And I was like, why am I being honored? Entertainment. Why am I being honored by, because Tyler's was pure motion picture. Why am I being honored by these people? I provided staff to the industry, but was that of a work? and in nature. I said, surely we're short of Black people to honor if, they're bringing me in here.
Mm.
And as I listened to them tell my story, it was impressive the way they told it, but they're in entertainment. That's what they do, right? There's no work there. There's no success if they don't. There were three other people who were being honored, though. And they're famous household names today, even. So I won't call them because this is what I'm going to share with you about two of them. Two of them were women, the other was a man. And the one woman is an icon to many people. And she shared that the struggle and the adversity she'd gone through, which included racism, sexism, and all kinds of isms, had built her character. And when the other woman was awarded, she reached over to her lovingly in a motherly kind of way, because she's a motherly kind of actress. And she put her hand on her shoulder and she said, "Darling, I appreciate that this has built your character. I didn't need these things to build my character. My parents helped me do that. I
Mm.
needed the opportunity to play those characters and I didn't get it." So, and then she went on to where she was. I'm tying that in to say, on the one hand, I'm sitting in a room watching Tyler Perry fall apart and say he had to pay big money and stay away for a while and go into a place of, self-worth to feel that he deserved to be honored. And then these other two women who had different impressions around it. What happened in that? And if I may be a little bit selfish, where am I in that?
Mm.
What is the lesson in that?
Yeah. So I want to start actually with your experience being honored and listening to the story
Uh-huh.
about yourself. And suddenly it dawned on you, hey, wait a minute. It actually, I am pretty good or maybe better than I thought. And this is what it's all about. It's all about the story.
Mm.
There's wonderful research by Timothy Wilson. He's a professor at University of Virginia on how do we bring about change. And he talks about that we bring about change through changing our story. So,
Mm.
what does Marva Collins do for her students? She changes the story, their self perception. I'm not just a passive victim who will do as many others from my neighborhood do. I'm a person who creates a good life for her, himself, and for others. She changes their narrative about themselves. And this is what we need to think about. And this is, by the way, as you pointed out, part of the me search. So, how do I tell a favorable story about myself? And by the way, imposter syndrome, yeah, we all have some of it. And we all have mornings when we wake up and say, it's impossible, or I can't do it, or I don't deserve it. So
Mm.
what? So we feel that. Our feelings don't define us. What does define us are our actions and then the stories that we tell about
Mm.
those actions.
Mm. Mm.
And we can tell very different, even waking up in the morning, I can say to myself, okay, I'm going to get up and, just sit in front of my computer for 3-4 hours and then, have lunch and, boring. Or I'm going to sit in front of the computer and share what I care about so much and what I study so deeply. And that's so meaningful and so important because it changed my life and it can change others' lives. I may be objectively doing the same thing, sitting in front of my computer, but the story is different.
Mm.
And the story matters because a story doesn't just describe our past, the story also creates our future.
Oh my goodness. Like for us growing up in the deep south, everybody in my hometown was a Christian with the exception of two families who were Jewish. And they used to tell us, you can read all the Bible you want. The words from Jesus were in red. They were very few. They all related to love, and they were parables. They were all stories. He talked in
Stories.
stories. And So I mean, regardless, and we can put anybody's name in the place of Jesus if they were a great leader spiritually.
Exactly. I call stories,
Wow, wow, you opened that for me. Thank
you
you.
know, I call stories the unifying theory of psychology. You know, in physics,
Psychology.
they were looking for a unifying theory in physics, and they didn't find it. This one formula that explains everything. Einstein looked for it, Max Planck, Marie Curie looked for it, Aristotle looked for it, couldn't find it. Probably, above our pay grade. Maybe only God knows.
Uh, uh, uh.
However, there is a unifying theory in psychology, and it's stories. Because everywhere you look in psychology, you find stories. You look at the, organizational psychology, the greatest leaders, and yes, whether it's the Bible, whether it is whether it's great political leaders who are storytellers, whether it's great teachers it's all about stories.
Maybe
What do
that's why songs are become attached to movements, huh? Or create movements, huh?
Exactly, because a song is a narrative. That's what it is. Now you put music onto it, you make it even more powerful because now you have
Uh,
the emotions associated with it in a
mm,
more direct way. But it's
mm,
all about the narrative. That's why songs, also cultural songs, matter a lot. There are songs that situate us as victims, and there are
mm.
songs that look at us humans as heroes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Doctor, so you talk about self discipline as well. How does self discipline relate to happiness? Like many people think happiness means doing whatever feels good in the moment, or there's some that believe it has a deeper connection between structure, effort, and genuine fulfillment, right? One of the things that I teach is, and let me let me preamble that with English was my course of study in school. I teach discipline ain't a dirty word. Am I correct or should I stop telling people this?
Hmm. And I agree, it's not a dirty word. It's great. There's the one challenge with it.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of self-discipline. And when I say we, I don't just mean, me, you, and one other. I mean human beings.
Uh-huh.
What do we have? We have the capacity to engage in rituals. If you look at the most successful people in the world, they don't necessarily have more discipline than others, but they have more healthy rituals than others. And I say healthy because, you know, smoking is also a ritual. Because, eating junk food is also a ritual. Being unkind and a dictator as a manager is also a behavior that's ritualized. But so is being kind.
Mm,
And so is singing songs with positive words so that your kids can hear and be inspired.
mm,
So is helping others. These are all rituals, practices that are formed through disciplined action,
mm.
but we don't have a lot of it. And that's why the key is not to think about how can I lead a disciplined life, but how can I lead a ritualized life?
You have elevated my teaching, and from this day forward, that is where I will go. And I will certainly be honored to give you the credit for that because it really means a lot to me that you brought me forward today, Doctor. I got one more question I want to ask you before we go to 4 for 4. Um, today's hyperconnected world creates what might be called too much noise. From your perspective, how is our relationship with technology affecting our capacity for joy? Are there healthier approaches to technology that science does support?
When it comes to technology, it's there are, of course, ups and downs. And that basically applies to any force that you think about. Think electricity. Is electricity good or bad? Well, it depends. You can use electricity for a life support system, but you can also use electricity to electrocute an innocent person. So it's the same with technology. Technology is great. I've gotten in touch with recently with my best friend from we were 12, and his family moved away, and we haven't been in touch since over 40 years. Thanks to technology, we're in touch again. The problem, the downside, is when technology replaces the fundamentals, the basics. And by that I mean relationships. By that I mean movement. So if kids are no longer, I mean, what did you do when you were a kid? You played outside, I'm assuming, as
Mm-hmm.
did I, as did most kids. Today,
Until the
what do
street lights came on.
Very exactly. And what happens today? Today, most kids spend most of the afternoon in front of the screen. Very unhealthy. Again, unhealthy physically, but also unhealthy emotionally, because there is no substitute to playing in the same sandbox together. There is no substitute to going, on a bike together, to having arguments face to face. This is how we learn. This is how we grow. This is how we cultivate resilience. And children today are missing that, which is why levels of depression and anxiety are at an all-time high when it comes to kids. And that's unfortunately probably going to be translated into adulthood. And what we need to do and what parents need to do is to limit the use of technology, to put boundaries on those. Again, it's not that technology in and of itself is good or bad. The question is, how do we use it rather than be abused by it, which
The
is
same as with our
unfortunately,
food. The same as with the food we eat.
it's exactly the same as with the food. Food, of course, yeah, food is great, but in moderation. And also the question is, what kind of food, what kind of technology do you consume? I often think about this. We live in a wonderful time. I mean, I have access to the best music in the world, literally at my fingertips. I have access to the most wonderful actors and actresses and theater and movies. What a privilege to be living in this world. And at the same time, if you're on social media for 3 hours or more, as is often the case a day, that's very harmful for your physical health and for your psychological health.
You know, uh, it was well before COVID. I'm trying to remember the year. The year is not important, I think. Well, it could be, but here's what I'm going to put to you, Doctor. I had gone to Sweden and I attended a conference. It was an AI conference, and there, one of the presenters shared a poll that had been taken of young adults, meaning people under 35, in his research, who identified as male, who, when asked if they would prefer to construct their own lifelike partner, robotic partner, or to have a live woman, they were shocked at the high percentile who said they'd rather create their ideal personal Siri. And for all relationship needs, the idea being that it was possible for them to construct
Mhm.
this humanoid. And overwhelmingly, I can get the data on it because I think I kept it. I believe, don't want to be in error here, but it was like in the high 70 to 80% would rather have the humanoid if they could help construct her.
Mm.
They wanted a she. They wanted a she. They were asked. Um, and so as I listen to what you're saying, I'm not going to place judgment on whether that is a good or bad thing. I'm going to say it does listen, I think, in carbon copy to everything you've shared with us today.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not going to be as generous as you are, JBH. I am going to place some value judgment on that. It's a real problem. And you're spot on. This is what's happening today, and that research is unfortunately no longer theoretical as of a couple of years from now. Now, with the onset of AI, you're going to have a machine that's going to be able to respond in a very similar way to humans. And with advances in technology and robotics, people are going to be able to essentially replicate. We have the Stepford wives. It's no longer sci-fi. Or Stepford husbands. No discrimination here. And the question is, what is that going to do to human beings? So imagine if you could literally create your ideal man or woman with the ideal personality. And if after a week or 3 years you've had enough, you just bring in another with different characteristics or different looks.
And you're not Dorian Gray.
Exactly. That's right. And yet you'll be able to maintain whatever you want for as long as you want. Now, what are the consequences of that going to be? Is it going to be happiness? And are they going to really have ideal, incredible relationships? The answer is no. Because one of the things that real relationships do to us is they help us grow. And they help us grow because they're real, because there are consequences to what we say, because we make mistakes, because our partner is not perfect. These are all elements, parts of being human. And we will forego a great deal of growth and development if we do not have, or if we forego real relationships, and therefore real happiness, deep happiness will not find its way into its life because there are no shortcuts, unfortunately.
Mm. Whew. Let's go 4 for 4. We've got such a short time to do this, Doctor. Good talk with you and listen to you. Please come back, okay?
With
Um,
pleasure.
4 for 4. 4 questions, 4 answers to each. All answers are open. We'll ask you to the first question, give us a person and not a humanoid, because you get to invite 4 people to dinner from any time in history to present. Who's at your table and why?
Yeah. So the first one's not going to come as a surprise to you. It's Marva Collins. I met her once. I used to talk about her I still do, about all the time. And my friend for my 40th birthday took me to North Carolina to meet her. But I would invite her for dinner and ask her to stay forever. So Marva Collins is the first one. The second is Aristotle. I would love to hang out with him. I see him as the founder of the field of happiness studies. The third one is Lao Tzu. I want to learn more calmness, acceptance from him. I think it will be very good, not just for me, but for all living, present, and future perfectionists. And the last one is Marianne Evans, who was an author she wrote in the 19th century, had to change her name to George Eliot to get published. But sometimes when you read a book, you get to a paragraph and you say, wow, I can't believe someone wrote this. This is just so brilliant. Well, her book, Daniel Deronda, 1,000 pages or so, every paragraph is like that. I want to meet her.
That's fantastic. I want to come to that dinner too. Okay, so we'll expand it to 5. Second is about music. What 4 pieces of music are you listening to, and why?
Yeah. So my favorite song, and all my students know this, is Whitney Houston's "And I Will Always Love You."
Oh,
I've heard it, I don't know, 1,000 times.
Dolly Parton's "I Will Always
I
Love
know.
You."
So here is some. I just heard a whole podcast on the evolution of the song, and I will always, because it only ended up as and how did Kevin Costner decide that this was going to be the song for his and Dolly Parton, of course, initially. Anyway, so this is one
Who
song.
happens to be one of my sheroes, Dolly Parton. So
I can understand why.
all things Dolly.
I can understand why.
Mm-hmm.
Another, I listen a lot to Bruno Mars.
Mm-hmm.
His song on "You Can Count on Me" is
Right.
one of my all-time favorites, because I love the message in his words, and of course his music is just incredible. I listen to a lot of classical music, so I would say Yo-Yo Ma's especially his Bach pieces. I have listened and will continue to listen until the day I
You're more
die.
sophisticated than I am. I love Chopin, but go for
I do too. Well, you and my wife need to meet. Our house is always Chopin. Um, and then here's another one that I just, even though they're from my time, my son introduced me to them, and that's Rush, which is
Uh-huh.
they're Canadian, and they didn't cross my radar screen at all. But my son plays the guitar, and he loves them, and now that's what we listen to in the car.
Oh, that's so cool. That's
Yeah.
so cool. Thank him for introducing you to that from me. Let's do books. I mean, this is your forte, yes? What four books do you recommend to our audience,
Yeah.
our family, and why?
So a book that really helped me and deal with my perfectionism was Nathaniel Brandon's the Six Pillars of Self-Esteem. And it's a book that really changed my life. I actually ended up writing my dissertation on his work. Also had the privilege of meeting him before he passed. So the Six Pillars of Self-Esteem would be one of them. Another book, I'll move forward, a book that I just recently read, even though it was published I think 7 years ago or so, is Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Mm.
And it's I read it just recently, have been recommending it to all my students and friends. My kids are reading it now. Deep Work, and I think it's especially important. And he, by the way, JBH talks about. Oh, you would have a wonderful conversation with him. He talks about technology and what it's doing to us today, and what are some of the antidotes, and how we can, go deep rather than surf.
That's good
But we
because
can
most
dive.
talking what it's doing for us. He's talking what it's doing to us. Yes. Or
Exactly
can do
right.
it to us if we're, well, in some instances, it's going to do it to us with or without our permission. In other instances, we do have permission.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
The third book is one that I mentioned, Daniel Deronda by Marianne Evans,
Mhm.
and which it's just
That's so sweet of you to call her name.
yeah, it's unfortunate. If she was alive today, she would go with Marianne,
Yeah.
not George.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and finally, I have to recommend this book, which this is where I first met Marva Collins. So the Marva Collins Way.
Yes.
It's an autobiography, but it's a gem. So,
Mhm.
if you're interested in parenting, on leadership, or management, or teaching, of course, this is the first book that I would read, The Marva Collins Way.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Doctor, are you ready to go 4 for 4? I don't want to go 4 for 4 because it means we're coming to a completion on this conversation. However, please promise you'll come back, okay?
I will. If I'm
Then
invited, I'm back.
we will go 4 for 4 then. So, what 4 pieces of advice do you leave with this family and why? And if it's advice that was given to you by someone else or that you gained from someone else, please show homage to the author.
Yes. So I want to make it simple.
Okay.
I love acronyms. I teach using acronyms, whether it's the 3 R's of change, or I have, a dozen other acronyms. So I'll use the 4 L's
Okay.
in terms of advice. The first one is learn. And here the homage is to my 2 parents. And from a very young age, it was all about, the narrative, the reminders, the repetition, the rituals were all around learning. My dad, my mom would constantly teach us, read with us, encourage us
Mm.
to learn and then to teach.
Information is freedom. That was my
It very, very much so, very much so. And there's great research on curiosity, and curiosity, no big surprise. People who are curious, who ask questions, who are lifelong learners, are more successful. Curiosity, lifelong learning contributes also to happiness. But more recently, research came out showing that curiosity is connected to longevity.
Mm,
So,
mm.
JBH, you're going to live a long time.
Well, thank you very much. And I will tell you, you talked about people and perfection. My husband was not a perfect man, but he was a perfect man for me. And one of
Mm,
the things that was the sexiest, the strongest, the
mm,
kindest, the most it about him was he continued to want to learn
to
for
learn.
all of his life. He
Yeah,
continued to, even through his Alzheimer's and dementia, he
amazing.
continued to want to
Yeah.
learn. So, thank you.
So the first thing is learn, and learn whether it's through, podcasts and conversation, whether it's through books, whether it's through conversations, discussions, which leads me to the second L, listen. Number one predictor of great leadership is not how charismatic you are. It's not how brilliant you are. It's not how eloquent you are. It's not how much you know. Number one predictor of great leadership, the ability to listen.
Mm,
There is a very telling story. And by the way, today we know it from research. But as is often the case, what comes a lot before research are, stories or religion. In the Bible, God goes to Moses and says to him, I've chosen you as the leader. And what's Moses' response? Thanks, but no thanks.
right.
And why?
I can't talk that well.
Exactly. I have a speech impediment.
Mm,
I stutter. And yet God chooses him. And there is a very important message here. For great leadership, it's not so much about talking, it's much more about your listening abilities. And again, today we have a lot of research to show that, God chose well. So that's the second L. The third L, oh, and also, by the way, parenting. Most important for parents is not to come up with solutions. It's usually to be there, to be to bear witness to what the children are going through or what they're saying, what they're learning. Listen. Um, the um, the third L is, of course, love. Number one predictor of happiness is quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. And it could be our, family members, it could be our colleagues, it could be friends, and we can always give love through kindness and generosity. And that's, of course, related to listening. So love. It's the supreme, Barbara Fredrickson calls it, the supreme emotion. And the last one, and here I'm talking as much to my perfectionist self as I am to others, is let go. Just let go. Um, we are Leo Buscaglia, who has a book also with, he talks about the three L's, living, loving, and learning. Slightly different, but it's the first self-help book that I read. I don't know, maybe I was 18. And he says that 99% of the things that we worry about don't actually happen. And yet we worry. So just to let go, to be to worry less, to love, listen, and learn more.
no matter what you see around you. Doctor, it's hard to let go of this moment with you. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. It has been a delight to me, and I'm sure it will be a light to the audience listening. I can hardly wait for us to talk again. Thank you so much for your precious time and your wisdom.
Me, thank you, and thank you for all the light that you spread. And I want to thank your mom too. I would have loved to invite her for dinner.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JBH.
You would not only have great conversation, but if she got into the kitchen, you'd have a great meal.
Bye-bye. Thank you.